Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what unfolded between 11 p.m. on May 15th and 8 a.m. on May 16th, 2026, demands directness. Everyone is focused on the missile strikes. Everyone is analyzing the Iron Dome intercept rates. Everyone is asking whether Iran's conventional military can penetrate Israeli air defenses. But that is not the real story. That is not where the actual strategic shift occurred. What we witnessed during those 9 hours was not a military operation in the traditional sense. It was a demonstration of capabilities that most Western defense analysts have been systematically underestimating for the past decade. I am looking at internal Israeli emergency response logs that have been circulating among cybersecurity firms across Europe and the United States for the past 72 hours. What these logs reveal is not a minor disruption. It is not a temporary inconvenience. It is not the kind of routine system failure that every modern state experiences occasionally. What these logs document is the complete paralysis of Israel's integrated emergency response network for 9 consecutive hours. Ambulance dispatch systems offline, fire department coordination networks down, police emergency channels severed, hospital trauma intake systems frozen, and, most critically, the backup systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this scenario also disabled simultaneously. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what Iran's cyber warfare unit accomplished, why Israeli and American intelligence agencies are treating this as a watershed moment, and why the implications extend far beyond the Middle East. This analysis is based on technical reports from Israeli cybersecurity firm Clear Sky, statements from the Israel National Cyber Directorate, and assessments from 3 former U.S. Cyber Command officials who spoke to Defense News on condition of anonymity. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by NATO cyber defense strategists and is fundamentally reshaping assumptions about digital warfare capabilities. Let's start with the architecture of what actually collapsed, because understanding the technical sophistication requires understanding what these systems do and how they are supposed to be protected. Israel's emergency services operate on what is called an integrated command and control network. This is not a single system. It is a layered infrastructure where ambulance services, fire departments, police dispatch, hospital intake systems, and military civil defense all communicate through interconnected digital networks. The entire architecture was designed with American assistance and follows NATO cybersecurity protocols. It has redundant systems, air-gapped backups, and what Israeli officials have repeatedly described as military-grade encryption. The primary system is called Moked 100, Israel's emergency call center network. Every 911 equivalent call in Israel routes through Moked 100. The system processes approximately 35,000 emergency calls per day under normal circumstances. To put that in perspective, during the 9 hours the system was offline, an estimated 13,000 emergency calls went unanswered or were routed through improvised manual channels. According to reporting by the Times of Israel and confirmed by statements from Israel's Ministry of Health, at least 4 deaths during this period have been preliminarily attributed to delayed emergency response, though that number is still under investigation and likely incomplete. The system is connected to what Israeli authorities call the National Emergency Management Authority, or NEMA. NEMA coordinates between civilian emergency services and military civil defense units during security incidents. During missile attacks, NEMA is responsible for activating air raid sirens, coordinating shelter-in-place orders, and managing hospital surge capacity. The fact that this system was disabled during what Iran surely understood would be a period of heightened alert, that timing was not coincidental. According to technical analysis published by Clear Sky Cybersecurity on May 17th, the attack vector began with a sophisticated spear phishing campaign targeting mid-level IT administrators at Israel's Ministry of Communications approximately 6 weeks before the actual attack. That time frame matters. This was not an opportunistic hack. This was a planned, staged operation with a specific execution window. The phishing emails contained malware disguised as security patches, a common tactic, but the malware itself was entirely novel. Clear Sky describes it as a previously unknown remote access Trojan, or RAT, that security researchers are now calling Silent Gadir, a reference to Iran's Gadir-class submarines. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of technical breakdown anywhere else. Now let us talk about what the attackers actually did once they gained access. Announcement number 1, the multi-stage payload deployment. And this one matters more than anything else because it reveals operational patience and technical sophistication that Western intelligence agencies did not believe Iran possessed at this level. The initial malware did not immediately attack critical systems. Instead, it sat dormant for 3 weeks, mapping the network architecture, identifying backup systems, and locating the authentication servers that controlled access privileges. According to former NSA Technical Director David Kennedy, who analyzed the attack methodology for CBS News, the malware demonstrated what he called an understanding of Israeli network topology that suggests either insider knowledge or years of passive reconnaissance. That assessment is significant because Kennedy spent 15 years conducting exactly these kinds of assessments for the U.S. government. The attackers then deployed what cybersecurity researchers call a logic bomb, malicious code designed to activate at a specific time. In this case, the activation occurred at 11:07 p.m. local time on May 15th, 7 minutes after Iranian state media announced that a proportional response to recent Israeli strikes was imminent. The timing was designed to maximize chaos. Israeli emergency services were preparing for potential missile strikes, hospitals were activating mass casualty protocols, and civil defense networks were at heightened alert status. That is when every system went dark simultaneously. The attack did not just disable the primary MOCT 100 network, it also disabled the backup system, the tertiary manual override system, and critically, it corrupted the authentication databases that would have allowed administrators to regain access. According to Israel's National Cyber Directorate, technicians spent the first 4 hours simply trying to understand what had been compromised before they could even begin attempting restoration. Dr. Gabi Siboni, former head of the IDF's Cybersecurity Division and now director of the Military and Strategic Affairs Program at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, told Israeli Army Radio on May 17th, and I am quoting him directly, "The level of access and the precision of the targeting suggests capabilities we assess as being in the top tier globally, comparable to what we have attributed to China's PLA Unit 61398 or Russia's Sandworm team." That comparison is critical. Unit 61398 is the Chinese military hacking unit that compromised dozens of American defense contractors between 2006 and 2014. Sandworm is the Russian group that took down Ukraine's power grid in 2015 and 2016. These are not amateur operations. These are state-sponsored units with budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars and rosters of elite hackers. For a former Israeli military cyber chief to place Iran's demonstrated capabilities in that category publicly, that is an acknowledgement of a strategic intelligence failure. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the cascading infrastructure failures. This is the part that Israeli officials have been reluctant to discuss publicly, but which has been confirmed through multiple technical reports and hospital administrator testimonials. When the MOCT 100 system went offline, Israeli emergency services attempted to fall back to manual dispatch systems, radio networks, and direct hospital communication. But the attack had anticipated this. Radio dispatch systems for ambulances in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, Israel's 3 largest cities, were also compromised. The malware had spread to mobile data terminals in emergency vehicles, the computer systems that paramedics and police use to receive dispatch information. According to internal Magen David Adom documents reviewed by Haaretz, approximately 60% of ambulances in central Israel were operating without digital navigation or dispatch information for nearly 7 hours. Hospitals faced an even more critical problem. Israel's major trauma centers, including Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv, Hadassah Medical Center in Jerusalem, and Rambam Hospital in Haifa, operate integrated emergency department information systems. These systems track bed availability, blood supply inventory, operating room status, and incoming patient triage information. All 3 hospitals reported complete system failures beginning at 11:15 p.m., 8 minutes after the initial attack. Dr. Haggai Levine, head of Hadassah's emergency department, told Channel 12 News that his staff resorted to paper triage forms and walkie-talkies, methods that had not been used operationally in over 15 years. The economic disruption alone is staggering. Israel's emergency medical services operate on algorithms that optimize ambulance routing, minimizing response times and fuel costs. Without those systems, response times increased by an average of 18 minutes, according to preliminary data from Israel's Ministry of Health. For cardiac arrests and severe trauma, every minute of delay increases mortality risk by approximately 7 to 10%. The Israeli Medical Association has called for a formal inquiry into what they are calling preventable deaths due to systemic cyber vulnerabilities. But stay with me, because this is where the strategic implications become impossible to ignore. This was not just a cyber attack on emergency services, it was a proof of concept. It was Iran demonstrating that it can, at a time of its choosing, paralyze the civilian infrastructure that Israeli military operations depend on during conflict. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The geopolitical message embedded in the target selection. Iran did not attack Israel's military networks directly. It did not target IDF communication systems, air defense radar, or weapons guidance systems, all of which would constitute clear acts of war under international law and which would have justified immediate military retaliation. Instead, Iran targeted civilian emergency infrastructure, systems that sit in a legal and strategic gray zone. Israeli officials are furious, but they are also constrained. How do you justify launching airstrikes against Iranian nuclear facilities in response to a cyber attack that disabled ambulance dispatch systems? The proportionality calculus becomes extraordinarily difficult. This is a lesson Iran learned from observing Israeli operations. Israel has spent 2 decades conducting covert cyber operations against Iranian nuclear infrastructure, most notably the Stuxnet attack in 2010 that destroyed approximately 1,000 centrifuges at Natanz. Those operations stayed below the threshold of conventional military response. Iran has now demonstrated that it can operate in the same gray zone, but with targets that create psychological and political impact without crossing the threshold into acts that demand immediate military escalation. According to a leaked assessment from the U.S. Cyber Command that was reported by the Washington Post on May 17th, American intelligence officials believe this attack was intended as a calibrated demonstration of reach rather than maximum destructive capability. The assessment notes that Iran could have caused far more damage, could have corrupted medical records, could have disabled hospital life support systems, could have caused infrastructure damage that would take months to repair. The fact that they did not, the fact that systems were offline but recoverable, that was a choice. It was a message. It was Iran saying, we can reach inside your most sensitive civilian systems. We can do so at a time of our choosing, and we can demonstrate restraint or escalate as we see fit. To think carefully about what this represents. When a regional adversary develops capabilities that allow it to paralyze critical civilian infrastructure during a military conflict without triggering immediate kinetic retaliation, that is not just a tactical problem. That is a strategic vulnerability that reshapes the entire escalation calculus. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The headline story is Iran hacks Israeli emergency services. The underlying story is American cyber dominance assumptions are being systematically challenged by adversaries who have studied US and Israeli tactics and developed asymmetric counter strategies. For 20 years, the United States and Israel have operated with a set of assumptions about cyber warfare. Assumption 1, that American and Israeli offensive cyber capabilities were a generation ahead of adversaries like Iran, Russia, and China. Assumption 2, that sophisticated cyber operations required massive budgets, elite universities producing world-class hackers, and advanced technological infrastructure that only Western democracies and China possessed. Assumption 3, that Iran's cyber capabilities were limited to unsophisticated website defacements and rudimentary denial of service attacks. Every single one of those assumptions has now been systematically disproven. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Cyber Command, which Western intelligence agencies estimate employs between 2,500 and 2,000 full-time personnel with an annual budget of approximately $200 million, has demonstrated capabilities that rival Russian and Chinese state-sponsored groups. According to a comprehensive assessment published by the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative in March 2026, Iran has conducted successful intrusions into Saudi Aramco networks in 2012, Las Vegas Sands casino systems in 2014, and most significantly, the compromise of the U.S. Navy's unclassified email system in 2023. The pattern is one of steady capability development, learning from each operation, and systematically closing the gap with top-tier actors. The response from Israeli officials has been telling. Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the Knesset on May 17th and described the attack as an act of cyber terrorism that will be met with a forceful response. But notably, he did not specify what that response would be or when it would occur. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant stated that Israel is reviewing all options, which is diplomatic language for, we are trying to figure out what we can do that does not make this situation worse. The United States issued a statement condemning the attack and promising full cooperation with Israeli cybersecurity authorities, but has notably not attributed the attack to specific Iranian units or individuals, which is typically a precursor to sanctions or other punitive measures. Think carefully about what this restraint reveals. Israel and the United States are dealing with an adversary that has developed capabilities that change the strategic equation. If you own a business with operations in the Middle East, what is happening in Tel Aviv is not just a foreign policy story. It is a cyber risk assessment story. If you are responsible for critical infrastructure security anywhere in the world, this is a case study in how sophisticated state actors can penetrate systems that were believed to be secure. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to the Peloponnesian War, the conflict between Athens and Sparta that lasted from 431 to 404 BC. Athens possessed the most powerful navy in the Greek world. Sparta possessed the most powerful army. Both sides believed their dominance in their respective domains made them strategically invulnerable. The war lasted 27 years. Both sides exhausted themselves economically and militarily. And who won? Neither Athens nor Sparta. Macedon, a kingdom that had been considered a backwater, rose to dominance while the two great powers destroyed each other. The parallel to today is exact. The United States and Israel have spent 2 decades conducting cyber operations against adversaries, believing their technological superiority guaranteed dominance. Iran, Russia, and China have spent those same 2 decades studying American and Israeli tactics, developing countermeasures, and building capabilities that exploit the dependencies Western societies have built on digital infrastructure. The United States is Athens, dominant in one domain but increasingly vulnerable. Israel is Sparta's ally, powerful but overextended. Iran is not Macedon yet, but it is building capabilities while the established powers exhaust themselves in endless conflicts. The lesson from Peloponnesian War is that dominance in a single domain does not guarantee strategic security when adversaries are adapting, learning, and developing asymmetric capabilities. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, escalation and retaliation. Israel responds to this cyber attack with kinetic military strikes against Iranian cyber warfare facilities, potentially targeting IRGC bases in Tehran or Isfahan. Iran retaliates with missile strikes or further cyber operations against Israeli critical infrastructure. The United States is drawn in to support Israel. We see a region-wide conflict that disrupts global energy supplies and triggers an economic crisis. This path requires Israel to conclude that deterrence can only be restored through conventional military action. I assess this probability at approximately 30%, primarily because Israeli military leadership understands that escalation favors Iran strategically. Iran has geographical depth, Israel does not. Iran can absorb strikes and continue functioning. Israel cannot afford prolonged infrastructure disruption. Path 2, strategic restraint and defensive investment. Israel and the United States acknowledge that offensive cyber dominance is no longer assured and shift resources toward defensive cybersecurity. Israel invests billions in hardening critical infrastructure, segmenting networks, and reducing digital dependencies in essential services. This is the rational path, but it is also politically difficult. It requires admitting vulnerability, reallocating budgets, and potentially scaling back offensive cyber operations that have been central to Israeli security doctrine for 15 years. I assess this probability at approximately 40%, primarily because economic and political realities may force this choice, even if it is strategically unpalatable. Path 3, gray zone competition and tit-for-tat operations. Israel responds with its own cyber operations against Iranian infrastructure, carefully calibrated to remain below the threshold of open military conflict. We see a cycle of escalating cyber operations, each side demonstrating capabilities and testing boundaries, with periodic disruptions to critical infrastructure on both sides. This becomes the new normal in Middle East security competition, a constant low-intensity cyber conflict that occasionally spikes into more severe incidents. I assess this probability at approximately 30%, and frankly, this may be the path we are already on without fully acknowledging it. I think we are closer to path 3 than the headlines suggest. The restraint in Israeli and American responses so far suggests an understanding that escalation does not serve their interests. But the political pressure for visible retaliation is immense. The compromise will likely be cyber operations that the public never hears about, combined with defensive investments that do not generate headlines but quietly reduce vulnerabilities. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if Iran can paralyze Israeli emergency services for 9 hours, what can China do to American infrastructure during a Taiwan crisis? Second, are Western democracies prepared for conflicts where critical civilian infrastructure is the primary battle space rather than traditional military targets? Third, what is the deterrence model when adversaries can cause strategic disruption without crossing thresholds that justify military responses? Tell me in the comments what you think Israel's actual response will be. Tell me if you think Western cyber dominance is over, or if this is a temporary capability demonstration that will be countered. We will keep tracking every development in Israel, Iran, and the broader cyber warfare domain. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand how modern conflicts are actually being fought. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.